So welcome to another video from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander, and it's the latest episode of From Cover to Cover. So this is a series of videos where instead of the usual kind of unboxings or specific war game or board game content with reviews and things like that, I'll do something a little bit different. We'll talk about some of the history books or war game related books that I have read, and then we talk about some games that go along with that. Now, this is a little bit of a different episode because I read a book, and I'm looking. I've never played a game on this, and I would like to, but so I want suggestions. I looked on Board Game Geek, and there's kind of some old ones. There's like some new ones kind of in the works. It looks like it might be like a postcard game. And I feel like it's a topic that I'm like, could make a really good game? Especially a good solitaire game, I think, as well. But there's just like, I couldn't find anything out. So, let's start with the book itself. So the book we're talking about today is called Memorial. And it's by a poet called Alice Oswald. Now, it says here, it's a version of Homer's Iliad. Now, I'm currently, at the time of recording this, I am slap dab in the middle of War and Peace. So you can look forward to that one coming in the future, where I have got some war games that relate to that. But this, it had been recommended, and I've read the Iliad a couple times, through school and through pleasure, and I feel like a lot of us know at least the story of the Trojan War and what's contained, at least the major points that's contained in the Iliad. They even made a film back in the mid-2000s that was like, yeah, it was fine. They had some cool visuals in it. Well, let's put it that way. And so this book was recommended because this is a very short, long-form poem that is an elegy to all of the, what I'm going to say, like, minor soldiers who were killed in the Iliad. So I got my copy of the Iliad here, this is the Lattimore translation. There's a million translations of it. This is the most recent one that I read. I studied this during my classics course for my biology degree. I did classics as an elective, but I studied classics back in my AS and A levels as well, and I read the Iliad and the Odyssey for those too. But it was a different translation back then, and I was 16, and I don't remember much of that from back then. But this book is extremely. It is fascinating. This is a wonderful book. If you can get a hold of this, this is close to a 10 out of 10 recommendation, because it is very quick to read. Like, I devoured this in a whole day. It's like, at its longest, 90 pages long. And even at the end of it, some of it's not 90 pages. I bought this secondhand, so dust jacket's a little bit worse for wear, but it is a nice little hardback copy. But it's literally the poetry itself feels like a contemporary interpretation of Homer's style, if that makes any sense to you. So basically, all the people who died or who were killed on the battlefield who weren't major players. So there'll be parts where it's talking about Ajax going around killing a bunch of people, or these, it's like there was this engagement and some people died. Those people who are named, who were just like, this is a name in Homer's Iliad, most of them get like a stanza. They get something more. And so usually in like Homeric poems and in classical poetry, you'll get all of the different kind of qualifiers, which are like almost like titles for these characters. So you have like a person, and it'll be like, you know, Demosthenes of blah 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 blah, and he was from a place, or he was a hunter. And so it's historical fiction because it takes those people and it gives them an extra like 8 or 9 lines about who they were, a little bit more detail about maybe their last moments, or it's what, their families, the consequences of this person's death. And so it breathes life into what were only names, and almost kind of like those names are named people that someone like Diomedes killed, so that you get a better indication of Diomedes being like this warmongering, bloodthirsty madman who was an extremely vicious and violent soldier. So you give him a list of names of people that he's killed, and that makes him, to the audiences at the time, seem like, oh dang, he killed this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and we remember those people's names that he's killed because those were someone, and he ended them. And so you get a little bit more than just a name in here. And so from that standpoint, I really, really loved this book. It was very touching in a way, in the thesis of what it was trying to do. Just to shed, if only a tiny bit of light on the lives of some of these people who were otherwise kind of like almost tossed away. So many forgotten people in the book, not named, but a name tossed away as a functional, piece of language to make a point effectively. And so it humanizes some of the victims of the Trojan War, so to speak, and some of those soldiers that died. And some of them are victims, or some of them are portrayed as victims, what I would say. Because how much of the Trojan War and all that kind of stuff. So it's beautiful in its gross morbidity. It is about grief. It is about death. It is about glory. It is about honor. It is about the fragility of life. This speaks to war on a level that a lot of historical books don't, and it can do that because it is poetry. There are the structure of the poem is that you will get often like a stanza that talks about one person, who they were, how they died, who killed them, or kind of some details about them. And then it will be followed by a simile that's almost always grounded in nature, in the earth, in those kind of Greek elements, something to do with like water or earth or fire, things like that. And then that simile will be repeated for poetic effect. So that's part of the reason it reads very quickly, is that it just flows along, and the repetition in itself is somewhat Homeric, although Homer's a little bit less heavy-handed with that. But the emphasis that's placed on some of those things, some of those similes are very visual, and some of them relate to the person's death and that kind of how they looked when they died. So there's lots of falling or slumping or reaching your arms out. And you'll have imagery from the natural world that immortalizes those people's deaths in those moments. When you are out and you see a hawk and he's flying around and he dives, that imagery is placed into one person's life or death, and to help you connect more than just this is someone that died thousands of years ago, if indeed they even existed. But I enjoy a poet or an author whose intentions are trying to tie some of the grander concepts and emotions and feelings of life together, so that we're not just thinking about these isolated things where we can say, hey, we can put war in a box and we can kind of sanitize that and put it on cardboard and not think about it anymore. But Alice Oswald does a wonderful job of tying a lot of the elements of our lives together. And I really, really like that. There were times where the book was kind of emotional because some of it is extremely visceral. There are like the sounds of death are at times like, woo, take a breather after that. There's a couple of now that all of that. A lot of the stuff is tied to kind of is fairly timeless. There are two very specific images, two similes that she has put into this book. And when I first read it, I was like, oh, that's a little bit jarring. And jarring is a funny word to use in that sense. But they worked so well. And that was a triumph of the book, is that the couple times where she strayed into really contemporary similes for what was ancient history, it worked so well. So there's one, maybe I shouldn't spoil them, but there's two, and they are so vivid, and they are so they're so perfectly chosen, and that's the beauty of poetry. That's the beauty of being an author, is picking the exact metaphor. When she talks about, and if you've read this, or if you do read this, please send me an email or send me a message or leave a comment, because I want to talk about this with someone. There are two similes that she talks about, and they are so visceral. Like, you can hear and feel and see exactly what happened in that instance for both of them. And both of them are things that we've all experienced, or we all know exactly what it is. And those, having a few of those contemporary nuggets in there really ties some of this stuff into kind of a modern life, and making this book relevant to myself and maybe how I consider the sacrifices of others, or the seemingly mindlessness of some of the conflicts that go on and people who are thrown into them. But there are also, and that's the interesting part about this book, is that none of these people are major characters. That's not true. The book kind of says that it is, but near the end, Patroclus is in here, and so is Hector, who are two of some of the most main characters outside of like Achilles, Ajax, Priam, etc. And so most of the characters in this book are people who are like, they're not anything glorious or anything that we know about, and that's the thesis of this book, is shining a light on those people that we don't remember, that we don't know anything about. And I think about this book, and I think about things like some of the memorials and some of the epitaphs out there in the world for some of the the wars and conflicts that have been fought. I think about tombs of the unknown soldiers. You think about some of the mausoleum at Verdun. Some of the huge cemeteries out there where, like, if you go and visit those, unbelievably powerful. But it's, at the end of it, I don't know anything about those people. The things that I know is that there is a name on a gravestone, and that they died during this war. You know, I don't know anything about those last moments, but more importantly, I don't really know anything about the lives that led up to those moments. And I would love to see this, maybe this kind of a thing. You could do this same exercise to all sorts of different conflicts or wars out there, and the effect would be similar, because the effect of this book when you're reading it is that it brings some humanity to what was just names in the Iliad, and people whose lives were just thrown away, and that's the only thing that we know about them. It's like, hey, Menelaus stabbed this person with a spear. Great. And like, on to the next line. Because that part of the Iliad's not the important part. It doesn't matter that that person was killed by Agamemnon, that person was killed, or like was shot by an arrow by Paris. Like, no one cares, because the point of the Iliad is all the stuff that happens in between all of that. But it was a beautiful piece of poetry anyway. But the actual thesis of the piece was really, really on point. It was really excellent. and I haven't ever read a lot of other like retellings or reimaginings of a lot of classic literature because I don't know, rather read the real thing. But when it was told to me, and when it was explained to me what it was, I'm like, oh yes, like that's an exercise, if it turns out to be one, that's worth going through. But it wasn't just an exercise; it was a great piece of art, and it was well worth your day of reading 90 pages. You know, I think I paid $13 for that. No, I paid 10. I paid $10 for that secondhand, for a nice little hardback that's gone on the shelf as well. But that's something that I'll revisit, and it also inspires me to go and like reread the Iliad again. But it's a beautiful book, 10 out of 10. I really, really liked it. However, it made me want to play some Trojan War games, and I don't have any. Not only do I not have any, there aren't a lot. Like I searched Trojan War and like Trojan on Board Game Geek, and it was like there just wasn't a lot, or there wasn't a lot that looked like it would be worth it. So if you know of something, please put that down in the comments. The one thing that I did think was quite enjoyable is that there is what do they call it? Crossbows and catapults, which is like a toy. There is a Trojan War expansion for it that has like a horse and everything in it. Like that was something that popped up, and I was like, "That's amazing that that exists." But like, yeah, if there's something on the horizon, or if that's something, I would love for someone to design a good solo game where you lay siege to Troy, or maybe the reverse where you're trying to defend Troy. I think that would be a great game, right? It's the game of kind of, here's all the troops arrayed, maybe keeping them all supplied, and then you could have a mechanic for like, you know, some of the one-on-one champion combat that they had to decide certain things. I mean, you could do a lot with it, but if anyone knows anything about that, or there are any good Troy games and I just don't know about it, I got a billion Peloponnesian War games, we got a billion Ancients War games, but not anything that's like, here's the Trojan War. Like, I don't know, wouldn't that be cool? Maybe I'm wrong about that. I would think that that would be interesting. So if that exists, please let me know. I know normally I have like a bunch of recommendations of things that I've played that would tie into this. I don't. And so this is one of those ones where I want to know. So if you do know, please do let me know. And maybe I'll revisit those, and we can get back into that at some point. But either way, Memorial, which is a version of the Iliad by Alice Oswald. Check this out if this be something that you're interested in. It was a fascinating read. Very quick to read as well. You could space it out over the course of a day or two, but like, man, I binged this, and it, you know, took a few hours. I almost like couldn't stop reading it because the pace of the poem is so quick, because it's like da 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 next person, da 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 next person, and you get enthralled by all the imagery. But you could slow down and you could take this in bite-sized chunks and really like absorb and consider and ponder some of the imagery and how that relates to some of the experiences and feelings that are expressed in the book as well. And that's something that like I did on a small scale, but it was really hard to put down. So either way, check that out if you're interested in, but appreciate you very much for sitting down with my ramble for a bit, but appreciate you very much for tuning in. I've been Alexander from theplayersade.com.